The dust of Redemption Creek was a fine red powder that settled on everything, a constant reminder of the cracked earth thirsting under a merciless sun. It coated the warped timbers of the bank, seeped through the cracks in the window frames, and settled in a gritty film on the sweating skin of the three souls inside. Scarlet Winters felt it in her throat, a dry rasp that mirrored the parched silence of the town itself. She stood before the teller's cage, her hand resting on a small leather satchel of coins, and the transaction a small defiant act of normalcy in a settlement that had long forgotten the meaning of the word. Then the silence shattered. The bank's double doors exploded inward, not kicked, but blasted from their hinges, vomiting a cloud of splinters and thick, choking dust. Two figures shrouded in long dusters and masked with stained bandanas filled the doorway. They moved with a predatory economy, one brandishing a Colt peacemaker that swept the room with cold indifference, the other hefting a canvas sack that clinked with the sinister promise of dynamite. The air grew thick-heavy with the scent of ozone and fear. The teller, a young man named Billy, whose Adam's apple bobbed like a fishing float, froze with his hands half raised. A third figure stepped through the ruined threshold, and the very temperature of the room seemed to drop. He was taller than the others, his duster a shade of charcoal gray that seemed to absorb the light. His face was hidden behind a black bandana, but it was his stillness that commanded the space. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood there, a specter of calm violence, and the world held its breath. "The vault," the leader said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that cut through the ringing in Scarlet's ears. It was devoid of accent, a voice polished smooth by a cold, singular purpose. Billy, trembling, fumbled with his keys. "The cash. Take it all. Just don't." The leader's head tilted, a gesture of mild, almost academic curiosity. One of his men stepped forward, pushed Billy aside, and retrieved a bundle of dynamite from the sack. He worked with methodical speed, packing the charge against the heavy iron door of the main vault. The leader ignored the cash drawers, his gaze fixed on the vault, as if it contained a personal enemy. Scarlet's world had narrowed to the thudding of her own heart. She was no stranger to violence. The West was a hard teacher. But this was different. This wasn't the desperate act of hungry outlaws. This was an execution. Her hand, which had been resting on her coin purse, instinctively drifted lower, brushing the worn leather grip of the Remington holstered at her hip. It was a fool's move, and she knew it. 3 of them, one of her. But passivity was a luxury her life had never afforded her. The fuse was lit. A hiss sliced through the tense quiet. The men stepped back, their leader showing no reaction at all, his posture unchanged. "Get down," Scarlet snarled, shoving the petrified Billy toward the floor behind the counter. She dove behind a heavy oak desk just as the world erupted in a cataclysm of sound and force. The explosion was a physical blow, a concussive wave that punched the air from her lungs and sent a shower of plaster and splintered wood raining down. Dust, thick and suffocating, boiled through the room, turning the midday sun into a murky, blood-red gloom. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the groan of tortured metal. The vault door, ripped from its hinges, had been thrown across the room like a child's toy. The robbers moved through the haze, ignoring the scattered bills that now carpeted the floor like autumn leaves. Their target was not the town's money. The leader stepped into the vault, his boots crunching on debris. He surveyed the rows of safe deposit boxes before pointing to one in the bottom corner. His man produced a crowbar, and with 2 sharp, brutal movements, pried the small metal door open. He reached inside and pulled out a single leather-bound document tied with a faded ribbon. The town's founding deed. The legal proof that Redemption Creek and every soul in it had a right to exist. As the man handed the deed to his leader, Scarlet made her move. She rose from behind the desk, her Remington now firm in her grasp, the hammer cocked back with a decisive click. "Drop it." The 2 henchmen spun toward her, guns raising. But the leader held up a gloved hand, a gesture that stopped them instantly. He turned his head slowly, his unseen eyes fixing on her. He held the deed in one hand, his other resting calmly at his side. He wasn't afraid. He was intrigued. "You have spirit," he rasped, his voice unchanged by the chaos. "It's a pity to waste it on a place like this." He took a half step toward her into a sliver of light that cut through the dust from a shattered window. The light caught the silver ring on his gloved finger, a heavy, intricate design of a coiled serpent devouring its own tail. And in that same instant, the light illuminated his eyes above the bandana. They were a pale, chilling gray, like a winter sky promising a blizzard. The sight, the ring, the eyes was a key, turning a lock deep within her mind. A memory fragmented and searing clawed its way to the surface. Fire, the smell of burning pine, and something else, something sickeningly sweet. The screams of her parents. A man standing in a doorway, silhouetted by the roaring flames, his hand raised. A silver ring glinting in the firelight. Eyes pale and cold, watching as her world burned. The scar on the left side of her face, a puckered trail of skin that ran from her temple to her jaw, began to throb with a phantom heat. The Remington in her hand grew heavy, useless. The room spun, the dust and the present dissolving into the smoke and terror of the past. Her breath hitched. Her resolve crumbled. The leader saw it. He saw the flicker of recognition, the sudden paralyzing terror that replaced her defiance. A flicker of something satisfaction, triumph flashed in those cold, gray eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to his men. It was all the opening they needed. One of the men lunged not to shoot, but to disarm. He slammed the barrel of his pistol against her wrist. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up her arm. Her fingers went numb, and the Remington clattered to the floor. Before she could recover, the second man shoved her hard against the wall. Her head cracked against the plaster, and the world swam in a haze of black spots. Through the fog of pain and memory, she watched them walk away. They didn't run. They moved with the unhurried confidence of men who had already won. The leader paused at the doorway, turning back to look at her one last time. He held up the town deed, a final silent gesture of contempt, before melting into the blinding sunlight outside. Dust choked the air. Gunshots echoed distantly as they rode out of town. The deed was gone. Scarlet slid down the wall, her body trembling, her mind a vortex of a past she thought she had buried. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a ghost returned to finish what it had started years ago. The town hall smelled of stale sweat and desperation. Mayor Thompson, a man whose ambition had long outstripped his courage, wrung his hands, his face as pale as bleached linen. The cracked earth of Redemption Creek thirsted under a merciless sun. And inside this room, the spirits of its people were just as dry. They took everything, a merchant wailed. Not the money, but the very paper that says this is our land. We're squatters now. Sheriff Miller, a man whose belly strained the buttons of his worn uniform, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Now let's be calm. I've sent a wire to the marshal in Prescott. We just need to. What Miller Scarlet's voice cut through the panicked chatter like a shard of glass. She stood in the back of the room, her arm in a crude sling Jebediah had fashioned for her, her face a mask of cold fury. Wait for a man 2 days' ride away to come and tell us what we already know, that we've been gutted and left to bleed out. All eyes turned to her. The scar on her face seemed darker, more pronounced in the dim light. It was a brand of survival they had all grown used to, but today it looked like a fresh wound. They were professionals, Scarlet, the sheriff said, his tone placating. There was nothing you could do. They weren't just professionals, she countered, stepping forward. They were specific. They left the cash. They knew exactly which box held the deed. This wasn't random. Her eyes swept the room, landing on the mayor. This was planned. Someone wanted our town wiped off the map legally. A murmur of fear rippled through the townsfolk. Winds whispered through the skeletal cabins outside, carrying tales of better days. But in here, the only tale being told was one of impending doom. Silas Blackwood, someone whispered from the crowd. The name hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Blackwood was a name that had arrived in the territory a year ago, carried on the winds of rumor and backed by an endless supply of Eastern money. He bought land ranches, water rights, anything that had a price, and even some things that didn't. He was a patient predator, circling Redemption Creek, buying up foreclosed properties, strangling its supply lines. Blackwood's a businessman, not a bank robber, the mayor said, though his voice lacked conviction. His men ride with silver serpent rings, Scarlett asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The sheriff's eyes widened slightly. You saw their markings? I saw more than that, she said, the memory of the fire flickering behind her eyes. She kept that part to herself. The town needed a leader, not a haunted woman. He's been trying to buy us out for months. We refused. Now he's taken the one thing that gives us the right to refuse. Later that evening, the setting sun made the red sand glow like embers, a sight that always unsettled her. She stood on the porch of her small ranch house, the only home she had ever known, rebuilt from the ashes of the old one. Jebediah, her ranch hand, and the closest thing to family she had left, sat on the steps, whittling a piece of wood with calloused, gentle hands. He was a man of few words, but his presence was a steady anchor in her turbulent world. You're thinking too loud, boss, he said without looking up. His voice was warm, peppered with a frontier wisdom that had soothed her more times than she could count. Gonna scare the coyotes. They're scared already, Jeb. We all are. She rubbed her bruised wrist, the pain a dull, constant throb. Miller won't do anything. Thompson will sell us out for a promise of a hot meal. The rest of them, they'll scatter as soon as Blackwood posts the eviction notice. Not all of them, he said, finally looking up at her. His eyes were kind. And not you. What can I do? The question was raw, stripped of her usual iron resolve. I have a memory of a ring and a pair of cold eyes. It's not enough. Blackwood is protected by lawyers and money. We have nothing. Jebediah set down his whittling. Your father, he didn't have much either when he founded this place. Just a belief that folks deserved a patch of ground to call their own, free from the big money of the railroads and the cattle barons. Her father. The name was a complicated weight in her chest. A hero to the town, a loving father to her. And a man whose final moments were shrouded in the same fire that haunted her waking moments. The fire that had given her this scar and taken everything else. Blackwood's encroaching on the territories north of here too, Jebediah said, his gaze drifting toward the distant, hazy mesas. Poking and prodding. The Apache don't take kindly to that. An idea began to form in Scarlett's mind, a desperate, dangerous thought. The Apache were a proud, isolated people, pushed to the brink by the relentless tide of settlement. They saw all settlers as invaders. But they also had a shared enemy. You're not thinking of... Jebediah started, his weathered face creased with concern. I'm thinking we need an ally, the likes of which Silas Blackwood has never seen. She said, her voice regaining its steel. Someone his money can't buy and his lawyers can't intimidate. She looked out at the vast, lonely landscape, at the unforgiving desert that had been both her cradle and her crucible. She had been a survivor her whole life, fighting for her small piece of the world. But now the fight wasn't just for her ranch or her past. It was for the soul of Redemption Creek. And to win it, she would have to ride into the heart of the one place every other settler feared to go, and ask for help from a people who had every reason to watch her burn. The ride north was a pilgrimage into silence. The sparse scrubland around Redemption Creek gave way to a starker, more ancient landscape of towering red rock formations and deep, shadowed canyons. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the land with relentless fury. This was the land of the Apache, a place where the air itself felt watchful. Scarlet rode alone against Jebediah's strenuous objections. This was a message she had to deliver herself. Trust was not a currency one could send with a messenger. After 2 days following a map Jebediah had drawn from the vague descriptions of a frightened trapper, she found the entrance to the canyon she was looking for. It was marked by a single sun-bleached horse skull resting on a cairn of stones, a clear warning. She ignored it, guiding her weary mare into the narrow passage. She was not halfway through the canyon when they appeared. They didn't ride out or emerge from behind rocks. They simply were there, materializing from the landscape itself. 4 Apache warriors, their faces grim, their rifles held with casual readiness. They formed a silent, impassable barrier. Scarlet reined in her horse, raising her right hand palm open in the universal sign of peace. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a stoic mask. "I am Scarlet Winters of Redemption Creek," she said, her voice steady. "I come to speak with your leader, Kalen." The warriors exchanged glances. One of them, older than the rest, with a face like a roadmap of desert wisdom, nudged his pony forward. "Kalen does not speak with trespassers." "I'm not a trespasser," Scarlet replied. "I'm a neighbor with a warning. We have a common enemy." The warrior's gaze was skeptical. He scanned her from head to toe, his eyes lingering for a moment on the scar that defined her face, then on the worn Remington at her hip. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the canyon. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Follow." They led her to their village, a collection of wickiups nestled in a hidden, high-walled valley, a secret oasis of green in the midst of the red desert. It was a place of quiet, ordered life. Women tended to cooking fires, children played in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree, and men mended tack and weapons. It was not the savage encampment of campfire stories, but a community fighting for its existence, just like her own. They brought her to the center of the village, where a man stood waiting. He was tall and lean, with a quiet authority that emanated from him like heat from a stone. His hair was long and black, his face was proud and severe, and his eyes held a depth of knowledge that made Scarlet feel like a child. This was Kalen. His dialogue was deliberate, formal, and imbued with the weight of his people's history. "You are the woman from the town of Ashes," he said, his voice calm but resonant. It was not a question. Scarlet stiffened. "My town is named Redemption Creek. It was built on the ashes of one of our winter camps, burned by your people's soldiers long ago," Kalen stated, his tone matter of fact, not accusatory. "We remember. The land remembers. Why are you here?" The bluntness of his greeting stripped away any pretense. "A man named Silas Blackwood is trying to destroy my town. His men raided our bank and stole our founding deed." Kalen's expression didn't change, but a flicker of interest sparked in his dark eyes. "The man who sends his surveyors to mark our sacred mountains, the one who fouls our springs with his cattle." The same, Scarlet confirmed. "He wants the land, all of it, yours and mine. When my town is gone, he will turn his full attention on you. I came to propose an alliance." Kalen was silent for a long moment, studying her. "Your people and my people have been at war for a generation. You see an alliance. I see a rabbit cornered by a coyote asking a wolf for help. Once the coyote is gone, the wolf is still hungry. I'm not asking you to fight for my town," Scarlet said, her voice hardening with conviction. "I'm asking you to fight for your own land, with me as your ally. Blackwood's men, the ones who raided the bank, they are not simple outlaws. They are disciplined, well-armed. One of them wore a silver ring, a serpent eating its tail. At the mention of the ring, Kalen's stoic facade finally cracked. A muscle in his jaw tightened. He turned to the older warrior who had first met her. "This is the symbol of the hired men who attacked our hunting party 2 moons ago. We thought they were prospectors." He turned back to Scarlet, his gaze now sharp, piercing. "What do you want from us?" "Information. Trackers. Men who can move through this land without being seen." I need to find Blackwood's base of operations, find proof that he hired those raiders, and get my town's deed back. You help me do this, and I give you my word. I will use whatever influence I have to ensure the boundaries of your lands are formally recognized and respected. A treaty guaranteed by my town's authority. Kalen considered her offer, his eyes searching hers for any sign of deception. Your words are strong for a woman with a scar of fire. It teaches a person what is worth fighting for. He gestured to a warrior. Give her water and food. We will counsel on this. Your proposal has merit, but trust is a seed that grows slowly in barren ground. For the next 2 days, Scarlet remained in the Apache village. She was treated not as a guest, but as an object of cautious observation. She watched them too, seeing not the savages of rumor, but a people of profound dignity and resilience. She saw the quiet strength in their community, a strength Redemption Creek had lost. On the 3rd morning, Kalen approached her as she tended to her horse. We have decided, he said, his tone formal. Blackwood is a poison in the land. We will help you find its source. I will ride with you along with 2 of my best scouts. But this is not an alliance of friendship, Scarlet Winters. It is an agreement of necessity. You will show us you are a woman of your word. All I have left is my word, Scarlet replied, meeting his gaze. He nodded slowly. Then let us hope it is enough. Together they rode out of the hidden valley, a small grim party of 4, the scarred rancher, the Apache leader, and 2 silent warriors who moved like shadows. They were 2 sides of a fractured world, united only by the shadow of a common enemy. As they crested the ridge, and the vast, unforgiving desert stretched out before them, Scarlet felt a sliver of something she hadn't felt since the bank robbery. Not hope exactly, but the cold, sharp clarity of a fighting chance. The trail was cold, but the Apache were masters of a language the desert only spoke to them. Kalen's scouts, a young man named Chayton, and the older warrior named Taza, read the bent blades of grass and the displaced pebbles as if they were words on a page. They moved with a silent, fluid grace that made Scarlet feel clumsy and loud. Kalen rode beside her, his presence a quiet constant. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were precise. Blackwood's men ride like soldiers, not bandits, Kalen observed one afternoon, gesturing to a set of hoof prints. They keep formation. They do not waste movement. These are not men who rob for coin. They rob for a paycheck, Scarlet said grimly. Blackwood's paycheck. Over the next few days, a tentative respect grew between them. Scarlet learned to appreciate Kalen's deep understanding of the land, while he began to see past the settler and recognize the warrior in her. He saw the way she cared for her horse, the discipline with which she cleaned her rifle, the unyielding set of her jaw. One evening, as they shared a small smokeless fire, he finally asked the question that had been hanging between them. Your scar, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. It is the mark of a great fire. You survived a battle. Scarlet stared into the flames, the memory rising unbidden. I was a child. A fire. It took my home, my parents. I was the only one who got out. She traced the edge of the scar with her fingertip. It serves as a reminder of what you lost, of what I have to protect, she corrected. Their search led them to a series of small, abandoned mining camps in the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains, places Blackwood had bought for pennies on the dollar. In each one they found signs of recent heavy use. Discarded ammunition crates, remnants of military-grade supplies, and tracks from dozens of horses. Blackwood wasn't just hiring a few thugs. He was fielding a private army. One of his holdings, an old silver mine called the Widow's Grief, was situated in a box canyon easily defended and remote. It was the perfect place for a hidden base. They approached the mine under the cover of darkness. Chayton and Taza scaled the canyon walls like lizards disappearing into the shadows to scout the perimeter. Scarlet and Kalen waited hidden in a cluster of boulders, the silence of the desert amplifying the tension. Hours later, the scouts returned as silently as they had left. At least 20 men, Chayton reported. They have guards posted. The main office, the one by the mine entrance, is lit. A man is inside. He matches the description of the one you saw in the town, tall gray duster. This was it. The chance to get the proof they needed. We cannot fight our way in. Kalen said, his voice a low whisper. A direct assault would be suicide. We need what is inside that office. I'll go, Scarlett said immediately. They're looking for Apache warriors or a sheriff's posse, not a lone woman. I can get closer. It is too great a risk, Taza argued. The greatest risk is doing nothing, Scarlett countered. Just get me to the back of the office. I'll handle the rest. Kalen studied her for a long moment, then gave a single sharp nod. Chayton will create a diversion at the south end of the camp. A rock slide. It will draw the guards' attention. It will not last long. Go with Taza. He will show you the path. The plan was simple, and its simplicity was terrifying. Taza led her through a network of shadows and rockfalls at the base of the canyon wall, moving with an unnerving silence. In the distance, a sudden thunderous crash echoed through the canyon as Chayton sent a cascade of rocks tumbling down the far cliffside. Shouts erupted from the camp as men ran toward the sound. This was her chance. Taza pointed to the small, grimy window at the back of the main office. The spirits guide you, he whispered before melting back into the darkness. Scarlett crept to the window, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She peered through the glass. Inside, a man stood with his back to her, leaning over a large map spread across a desk. He wore the charcoal gray duster. Even from behind, the rigid commanding posture was unmistakable. On the desk, next to an oil lamp, was a heavy ledger and a small charred object. She carefully tested the window. It was unlocked. Slowly, painstakingly, she slid it upward, the sound lost in the lingering commotion from the diversion. Holding her breath, she slipped through the opening landing in a silent crouch on the floorboards. The office smelled of stale cigar smoke and dry ink. She rose, her Remington in her hand, and took a step forward. The floorboard groaned. The man didn't flinch. He didn't spin around. He simply straightened up slowly and placed a paperweight on the map. I was wondering when you would arrive, Miss Winters, he said, his voice the same cold, polished rasp from the bank. He turned around, and for the first time, she saw his face. It was a handsome face with sharp, aristocratic features, but it was marred by a chilling emptiness in his pale gray eyes. He wasn't wearing a bandana now, and she could see the faint, web-like scars that traced the skin around his left eye. A burn victim, like her. He offered a thin, mirthless smile. Silas Blackwood at your service, he said. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Please, there's no need for firearms. We have so much to discuss. Scarlett kept her gun trained on his chest. Where is the deed? The deed. Blackwood chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Oh, that's merely a tool. A key. The lock is what interests me. The lock is Redemption Creek. He picked up the charred object from his desk. It was the blackened, leather-bound cover of a book. But I imagine you're more interested in this. He tossed it onto the desk. It slid across the wood and stopped in front of her. It was a journal. Her father's journal. One she thought had been lost in the fire. Where did you get that? She breathed, her composure cracking. It was found in the wreckage. Along with this, he said, picking up the ledger. He opened it. A meticulous record of accounts. Your father was a very precise man. He logged every transaction, every debt. He tapped a page with his finger, including the one that led to the fire that destroyed my life. He looked directly at her, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous fury that had been simmering for over a decade. My name is not Blackwood. That is a name I took, a name with power. My real name is Silas Kane. My wife was Ilara. My son was Thomas. They died in that fire. The fire your father, the great founder and hero, started. The world tilted under Scarlett's feet. The journal. The ledger. His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. "No," she whispered. "It was an accident. A lamp." They said a lamp overturned. A convenient story. Blackwood sneered, his eloquent calm beginning to fray, revealing the raw wound beneath. "The truth is in that journal, Miss Winters, and in this ledger. Your father owed a great deal of money to the railroad. They were pressuring him to sell the town's land grant, the very land your precious deed represents. He refused, but he was in over his head. So he made another deal, a desperate one." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He took money from a man he shouldn't have, a man who saw the fire not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity to cover his tracks. When the debt came due, your father found himself with an impossible choice. He chose to set a fire. A small one, he probably told himself. Just enough to destroy the records office where the proof of his debt was kept. But the winds were strong that night. The fire didn't stop. Scarlett's mind reeled. Her flashbacks, the confusing details that never quite added up, the smell of kerosene, the way the fire had seemed to start in multiple places at once. It couldn't be true. Her father was a hero. "You lie," she said, her voice trembling. "Do I?" Blackwood's calm finally shattered, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated grief and rage. "My home was next to the records office. I was in Prescott on business. I came home to find a smoking crater where my family used to be. I found this journal in the ruins of your house. Your father wrote it all down, his guilt, his fear. He wrote of the terrible choice he had to make to save the town. He saved his town by sacrificing my family." He slammed his fist on the desk, the sound like a gunshot in the small room. "I have spent 15 years rebuilding my life, acquiring power, all for one purpose. Not just to take the land. I will erase Redemption Creek from the face of the earth. I will burn it to the ground on the anniversary of the night it was born from my family's ashes. And you, the last remnant of the man who did this, will watch it burn." The midpoint twist was not just a revelation. It was a fundamental shift in the moral landscape. The conflict was no longer a simple land grab. It was a deeply personal vendetta, a story of two survivors of the same fire, each believing their version of the truth. Scarlett stared at the man before her, a villain forged from the same fire that had scarred her, and for the first time, she understood him. The knowledge was a cold, terrifying weight in her gut. Her mission was no longer just about saving her town. It was about uncovering the full, unvarnished truth of her own past, a truth that might be more devastating than Blackwood's revenge. Scarlett backed away from the desk, the journal feeling like a lead weight in her hand, Blackwood's words echoing in the stunned silence of her mind. He let her go. He didn't try to stop her as she scrambled back out the window into the cold desert night. He wanted her to have the journal. He wanted the poison of the truth, his truth, to seep into her soul before he destroyed everything else. She found Kalen and his men in the wash where they had agreed to meet. She didn't have to say a word. The look on her face, the haunted, shattered expression in her eyes, told them everything. "We have what we need," she said, her voice a hollow whisper. "Let's go." They rode hard through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the widow's grief mine. They didn't stop until the first pale light of dawn painted the eastern sky. Huddled behind a rock outcropping, Scarlett finally opened the journal. The leather was brittle, the pages warped by heat and time. But her father's handwriting was unmistakable. She read as the sun rose, Kalen sitting silently nearby, granting her the space she needed. The entries confirmed Blackwood Silas Kane's story, but with agonizing, heart-wrenching context. Her father had been trapped. A ruthless land agent for the railroad, a man named Marcus Thorne, had him in a financial vice. Thorne wanted the town's land grant for the railroad, but her father refused to sell out the families who had trusted him. He'd borrowed money from Thorne personally to keep the town afloat, a debt that was now being used as blackmail. The final entry, dated the day of the fire, was a scrawl of anguish. Thorne demands payment or the deed. He has threatened the families. He says he will ruin us all. I see only one way out. A fire at the records office to destroy the loan papers. It is a terrible sin, but I must make this choice to save the town. May God forgive me for what I am about to do. I pray the wind stays calm. The wind had not stayed calm. Her father, the town's hero, had made an impossible, catastrophic choice. He hadn't intended to kill anyone, but his desperate act had created the monster who was now poised to destroy them all. The weight of this new history settled on Scarlett, not just as a daughter's grief, but as a leader's burden. He was wrong, she said, her voice thick with emotion as she looked up at Kaylin. He made a terrible mistake, and Blackwood's family paid the price for it. Kaylin's expression was unreadable, his gaze fixed on the horizon. A man's choices are arrows. Once released, he cannot call them back. They fly where they will. He turned his eyes to her. This changes nothing. Cain's pain does not give him the right to bring more pain to others. He seeks vengeance, not justice. We must still stop him. His simple, unwavering clarity cut through her confusion. He was right. Understanding the cause of the poison didn't make it any less deadly. They rode back to Redemption Creek with a new desperate urgency. Blackwood had mentioned an anniversary. Scarlett pored over her father's journal and the town's old almanacs. The date of the fire was 3 days away. When they arrived, the town was already in a state of quiet panic. A notice had been posted on the door of the town hall. It was a legal eviction order signed by a circuit judge in a neighboring county, a judge no doubt in Blackwood's pocket. The order cited the town's inability to produce a valid founding deed and declared all current residents to be illegal squatters. They had 72 hours to vacate. The deadline was midnight on the anniversary of the fire. Scarlett called another town meeting, but this time the atmosphere was different. She stood before them not just as a survivor, but as the keeper of a terrible secret. The eviction notice is a formality, she announced, her voice ringing with a conviction that silenced their frightened murmurs. Silas Blackwood doesn't want you to leave. He wants you here when he burns this town to the ground in 3 days. She told them everything: Blackwood's true identity, the story of the fire, her father's desperate, flawed choice. She laid the truth bare, hiding nothing. The revelation fell upon the room with a stunning weight. Their founding myth, the story of a heroic leader who built their town from nothing, was a lie. Or at least, a tragic, complicated truth. My father was not a perfect man, Scarlett said, her voice raw but steady. He made a choice he thought would save you, and it cost innocent people their lives. We can't change that. But we can choose what we do now. We can run and let his mistake be our legacy. Or we can stand and fight for the idea he started this town for in the first place, the idea that a community, a home, is worth defending. She looked from face to face, seeing fear, doubt, and betrayal. But in some eyes, she also saw a flicker of the same grit that had led them to this harsh land in the first place. Jebediah was the first to speak. I ain't running, he said, his simple words a declaration of war. This is my home. Slowly, others followed. The blacksmith, the stable owner, the weary, frightened mothers who refused to see their children made homeless. The spirit of Redemption Creek, so close to death, began to stir. As the town began to fortify its buildings and prepare for a siege, Scarlett, Kaylin, and his warriors planned their strategy. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Blackwood's private army would roll over them in a direct confrontation. Their only hope was to strike at the head of the snake. They had to get to Blackwood himself. The day before the deadline, as a dark bruised sky began to gather on the horizon, promising a storm, one of the town's boys came running to Scarlet. "They took him," the boy cried out of breath. "Blackwood's men," and they rode in and took old Jebediah. A cold dread seized Scarlet. Blackwood wasn't just coming for the town anymore. He was coming for her. He knew Jebediah was her weakness, her last link to a family. He was turning her father's impossible choice back on her, crafting a cruel personal crucible. The storm was no longer just on the horizon. It was about to break right on top of them. The storm hit Redemption Creek with the fury of a vengeful god. Rain fell in solid wind-whipped sheets, turning the dusty streets into rivers of mud. Thunder cracked overhead, a deafening drumbeat, counting down the final hours. Inside the saloon, the only two-story building in town, Silas Blackwood watched the grandfather clock in the corner, its heavy pendulum swinging like a guillotine. The hands ticked relentlessly toward midnight. He had taken the town without firing a shot. His men, 24 strong, had ridden in at dusk, their numbers and superior firepower crushing any thought of resistance. Now the townsfolk were huddled together in the center of the saloon's main floor, hostages in their own home. Jebediah was tied to a chair near the front window, a grim expression on his face, his eyes fixed on Scarlet. Blackwood held the stolen deed in one hand and the eviction order in the other. He was a portrait of calm, intellectual menace, his face illuminated by the flickering lantern light. In just under 1 hour, he announced, his eloquent voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "This document becomes legally binding. At that moment, you will no longer be residents. You will be trespassers. And I will exercise my right to remove you and this illegitimate structure from my property. Permanently." He placed a can of kerosene on the bar, the meaning perfectly clear. Outside, hidden by the deluge and the chaos of the storm, Scarlet and Kalen's small force moved into position. Kalen and his 2 warriors, Taza and Chayton, had scaled the slick, muddy wall to the saloon's second-floor balcony. Scarlet, along with the town's blacksmith and 2 other men brave enough to join her, crept toward the back entrance, their weapons shielded from the rain. Their plan was to create a 2-front assault to sow chaos and confusion and give Scarlet a path to Blackwood. "It is time," Kalen whispered to her through a cracked window pane they used to communicate. "The clock nears the hour." Scarlet took a deep breath, the cold, wet air burning her lungs. She looked at the faces of the men with her, their fear warring with their resolve. "For the town," she said, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "For our homes," the blacksmith replied, hefting a heavy hammer. Kalen gave the signal. On the second floor, his men smashed through the balcony doors, their war cries a piercing shriek that momentarily drowned out the storm. At the same instant, Scarlet and her men kicked in the back door to the kitchen. Chaos erupted. Blackwood's men, startled, spun around, unsure where the primary attack was coming from. Gunshots exploded in the confined space, the flashes of light momentarily illuminating scenes of frantic violence. Upstairs, the Apache warriors engaged the guards stationed on the landing, their movements swift and deadly. Downstairs, Scarlet and her small posse burst from the kitchen, adding to the pandemonium. Through the smoke and confusion, Scarlet's eyes locked on her target. Blackwood hadn't moved. He stood by the bar, a pistol now in his hand, watching the mayhem with a detached, almost curious expression. He had anticipated this. He had wanted it. As Scarlet fought her way toward him, Blackwood raised his pistol, but he didn't aim it at her. He aimed it at Jebediah. "Stop!" he commanded, his voice rising above the din. The fighting sputtered to a halt as everyone, friend and foe, saw the new terrible standoff. "Here we are," Miss Winters, Blackwood said, a triumphant smile twisting his lips. "A moment of choice. Just like your father's. You can save your friend, your family, or you can save the town. You cannot have both." If you or any of your people take one more step toward me, your loyal man dies. Then I will kill you, and then I will burn this place to the ground anyway." Scarlet froze. The world narrowed to the three of them, her Blackwood and Jebediah tied to the chair, the gun to his head. It was the nightmare she had dreaded. Her father's choice made flesh and blood and laid at her feet. "Don't do it," Scarlet Jebediah rasped, his eyes pleading. "The town, it's more important." An admirable sentiment, Blackwood sneered. But the choice is not his to make. Lightning flashed, illuminating a face in the crowd. Sheriff Miller. He wasn't cowering with the other townsfolk. He was standing near the bar, his hand inching toward his own holstered pistol. But he wasn't looking at Blackwood. He was looking at Scarlet. And in his eyes, she saw not fear, but a cold, calculating resolve. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "It was you," Scarlet said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You were the witness. The one who told Silas Kane my father started the fire." Blackwood's smile widened. "Very good. Sheriff Miller, or as I knew him, Marcus Thorne's ambitious young deputy, was the only other person who knew about your father's debt. He saw an opportunity. He fed a grieving, vengeful man the story he wanted to hear in exchange for a future position of power when I finally took this land. He has been my eyes and ears in this town for years." The sheriff, his betrayal exposed, drew his gun. "It's just business, Scarlet. This town was dying anyway. I chose the winning side. The standoff was now a complex, deadly triangle. Blackwood had Jebediah. The sheriff was ready to back his play. And the grandfather clock began to chime the hour of midnight. Each bong was a death knell. On the first chime, Scarlet made her choice. It would not be her father's. "Kalen," she screamed. From the landing above, an arrow swift and silent flew through the air. It struck not Blackwood, but the rope holding a heavy chandelier above the bar. The sheriff, his attention diverted for a split second by Scarlet's shout, looked up as the massive iron fixture crashed down, missing him, but shattering the bar and lanterns, plunging their side of the room into deeper shadow. In that instant of darkness and confusion, Scarlet dove not toward Blackwood, but sideways. She fired her Remington twice. The first shot was for the sheriff, a shot to his gun arm that sent his pistol flying. The second was for the leg of the chair holding Jebediah, splintering the wood and sending him tumbling to the floor out of Blackwood's immediate line of fire. Blackwood roared in frustration and fired at the spot where Scarlet had been the bullet burying itself in the wall. The fight was back on. Kalen and his men descended the stairs, re-engaging Blackwood's remaining forces. Scarlet scrambled toward Blackwood, who was now focused solely on her. He was no longer the calm manipulator. He was a cornered animal, his face a mask of hate. They met in the center of the room, a maelstrom of overturned tables and desperate bodies. He was stronger, but she was faster, fueled by a righteous fury. She knocked his gun from his hand, and they wrestled for control, slipping on the muddy, beer-soaked floor. "My father made a mistake." She grunted, driving her shoulder into his chest. He was weak, and he was scared, but he never wanted to hurt anyone. "He killed my family." Blackwood roared back, his hands closing around her throat. Her vision started to blacken at the edges. With her last ounce of strength, she slammed her forehead into his nose. There was a sickening crunch of bone, and his grip loosened. She shoved him back, and he stumbled, falling against the grandfather clock. The clock, its chimes silenced, toppled over with a great groan, crashing to the floor. Blackwood lay pinned beneath it, his leg trapped at an unnatural angle. The fighting died down as his men, seeing their leader defeated, surrendered to Kalen and the townsfolk. The storm outside began to subside. Rain softened to a drizzle. Scarlet stood over Blackwood, her chest heaving, her Remington aimed at his head. His cold gray eyes stared up at her, filled not with fear, but with a desolate, empty hatred. He had lost everything again. "Do it." He hissed, a bloody froth on his lips. "Finish it. Avenge them." Scarlett looked at the pathetic, broken man trapped beneath the instrument of his own deadline. Killing him would be easy. It would be the vengeance he craved, the end to his cycle of pain. But it would be his victory, not hers. She remembered Kaylin's words, vengeance, not justice. Slowly she lowered her gun. No, she said, her voice clear and strong in the sudden quiet of the saloon. Your vengeance ends tonight. You're going to live. You're going to live with the truth. My father wasn't a monster. He was just a man. And so are you. She turned her back on him, leaving him to the justice of the law, a fate far crueler for a man like him than a quick bullet. The town was saved. Her past was reconciled. The cycle was broken. In the immediate aftermath, as the storm outside broke and gave way to the clean, washed scent of rain on dry earth, a new sense of order began to settle over Redemption Creek. Blackwood and his surviving men, including the disgraced Sheriff Miller, were bound and held in the town's small jail, awaiting the arrival of the U.S. Marshal. Scarlett stood on the saloon's porch, watching the first light of dawn creep over the horizon. Kaylin came to stand beside her. The air between them was no longer filled with the tension of negotiation, but with the quiet comfort of shared victory. You chose a different path from your father, Kaylin set his eyes on the rising sun. You chose to build, not to burn. I learned from his mistakes, Scarlett replied. She looked at him, at the proud, steady leader of the Apache. My town owes you a debt it can never fully repay. You will repay it by honoring your word, Kaylin said. This land is large enough for both our peoples, if we respect the boundaries of the heart as well as the earth. He gave her a rare, slight smile. You have proven you are a woman of your word, Scarlett Winters. He and his warriors left as they had come melting back into the landscape as the sun climbed higher, leaving behind a town that had been given a second chance. Months passed. The seasons turned. Redemption Creek did not die. It was reborn. The partnership with the Apache tribe became the town's foundation. Trade routes were established. Kaylin's people taught the townsfolk how to find water and cultivate crops that could survive the harsh climate. And the town's blacksmith learned to repair Apache tools and weapons. They were no longer two separate communities surviving in spite of each other, but a single stronger one thriving together. The new deed, redrafted and co-signed by Scarlett representing the town and Kaylin representing the Apache Confederation, was registered and secured, an unbreakable legal and moral document. Silas Blackwood was tried and sentenced to life in a federal prison. His spirit broken not by the defeat, but by the testimonies of the townsfolk who spoke not of a monster, but of a man consumed by a grief he could not control. On the one-year anniversary of the saloon showdown, and the town gathered to dedicate a new memorial in the town square. It wasn't a statue of a hero, but a simple, elegant fountain, a symbol of life and renewal in the dry land. A bronze plaque was set at its base, and on it were etched the names of every person who had died in the Great Fire 15 years prior, including Alara and Thomas Kane. Scarlett stood before the memorial, a small tarnished silver locket in her hand. It had belonged to her mother, her only memento from before the fire. For years she had clung to it as a symbol of her loss, a constant reminder of the pain that had defined her. Now she saw it differently. It was a piece of a past she was finally ready to release. She knelt and dug a small hole in the soft earth at the base of the fountain. She placed the locket inside, covering it with soil. With that simple, symbolic act, she buried her ghosts. She let go of her pain. She forgave her father for his impossible choice. And she embraced her new role not as an isolated survivor, but as the leader of a healing community. As she stood, Jebediah, now the town's newly elected sheriff, handed her a letter. It had arrived that morning bearing the official seal of the United States Marshal Service. She opened it and read it aloud to the assembled crowd. The letter informed them that their testimony in the trial of Silas Blackwood and the ledgers recovered from his office had provided the final pieces of evidence needed to uncover and prosecute a vast railroad conspiracy to illegally seize land across the territory. Marcus Thorne had been arrested. The letter ended by stating that Redemption Creek, for its courage and cooperation, was now under the formal protection of the federal government, ensuring its future was secure. A cheer went up from the crowd. Scarlett looked at their faces, hopeful, resilient, and free. She looked toward the northern mesas where Kalen and his people lived, and then at the fountain where the names of all the fire's victims rested together in peace. The cycle of vengeance was over. The work of redemption had truly begun.